बैठ जाओ लोगों फटाफट. Okay. This title is थोड़ा सा outdated. जब मैंने बनानी शुरू की थी ये, तो I thought we will talk about daydreams and other things that escape classification, but then I decided not to. So this is somewhat not correct. Okay, so what are dreams? Guys, nobody knows what a dream is? जी पुत्र बाद ऊंचा.
It's what you see when you fall asleep. Something disconnected from reality, but tangible enough.
So can you have a dream in which you don't see stuff, but you hear stuff or you feel stuff? Yeah. So it's mentation from dreaming, right? It's mentation from while sleeping, right? It's mentation while sleeping. Is there a special characteristics? Do we remember all the mentation that we have while sleeping? Nahi, right? So, consciousness never fades during waking. However, when awakened from sleep, sometimes we recall dreams and sometimes we recall no experiences. So, basically, remember the dreams are only the material that we remember from mentation during sleep. There's a lot, sorry, apologies. There's a lot of stuff that happens. Thank you, Adrian. Apologies. There's a lot of stuff that happens during sleep that we don't recall. Is there any way for us to access that material? The stuff that happens while we are asleep that we, Jiputar. Louder.
I'm not sure, but I think in some instances hypnosis, right?
So that's a way to explore at least. I'm not sure, but absolutely that could be one. Jiputar. I do not know the answer to that. But has anybody ever had this experience that that you don't recall a dream, but then something happens midday, and you're like, oh my God, where did this just happen? And then a few hours or a few days later, you're like, oh, I dreamt about it, right? So you don't have any memory of the dream until something happens to trigger that dream. And we'll see why memory of dreams is really important. There's an evolutionary reason why we don't remember our dreams. Okay, so history of dreaming. 5,000 years, ancient Iraqis recorded their dreams on wax tablets, or at least their kings recorded their dreams on wax tablets. We don't know about the ordinary person. 4,000 years ago, the ancient Egyptians had a book of common dreams and their interpretations. Okay. In 17 to 1800 BCE, Joseph had dreams about his family and future. That picture is a hint of what Joseph dreamt about. Who can tell me about what Joseph dreamt about and how did he interpret it? Okay, Jiputar, uncha loud.
Is this the 7 dry years?
No, so that is also that dream from the same story, but this is not that dream. He dreamt that 7 stars and moon were bowing to him. Uncha putar bataye. Or the moon were bowing. They were all bowing to him. And what did he interpret that as?
I think he interpreted that he was the moon.
No. Anybody else? Jiputar, uncha?
His father interpreted it for him that you were the sun, basically the biggest star of the moon, and all of your.
No. The moon is his father. Remember, who had gone blind at his loss? And the 7 stars were his brothers. So it was his father, and the 7 stars were his stepbrothers and his Benjamin, his full-blooded brother. They were all bowing to him. So this is in the Bible, this is in the Quran. Is that in the Torah? Do you know? Yeah, it is. Yeah. So dreams have had this hold on human imagination for a very long time. And then in early 1900s, Freud, who is like a giant in psychology, basically came and said that they were a way to wish fulfill our subconscious desires. Who thinks that Freud was correct? Okay, Putar, please elaborate. What do you mean?
I do think it could be like the inverse as well.
So does that happen? Stuff that you want in real life, you actually it can. How many people have had that dream? Something that you want in real life, you're getting that in a dream. Yaar, you are all so much, you have so much better dreams than I do.
Yes, no,
Huh?
yeah, like something that you deeply fear, that can also be happening in the dream.
Okay, okay. Ji Badar, Uncha.
So, from what I remember,
Hmm?
so it basically said that dreams were defense mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
So they helped you basically see
Mm-hmm.
things that scared you in real life
Mhm.
in a way that was digestible to you.
Right. So it's repressed desires. So somebody who, so you fear, so, what is the story of Oedipus? What is the big repressed desire?
To
You want, you have unsuitable intentions towards, mother figures in your life, right? So that's a repressed desire. Dreams sort of unpack that, and it could be something else. It could be other things, and they help you unpack that and help you deal with, your deepest fears. And then Jung, who basically, again, who has seen the Red Book, the new book, the book that was published 100 years after Jung had died? Okay, we are talking about this in creativity, so everybody should look up the Red Book, okay? So Jung says that dreams are the highway to unconscious. It's a way we don't have any direct access to our unconscious, and so they are a way where, messages from the unconscious come there. This is just basically, I put a series of things that I thought could be dreams, so it's sometimes dreams are like a story. It's like it has a screenplay, and there's some sort of logic. It may not withstand the logic that we have during waking hours, but inside the dream it has logic. There's a whole story. Sometimes it's just scattered images or scattered sounds or scattered emotions. Time sort of loses its hold on us, and we can fly and do things and go to places, meet people who are dead or meet people that we do not know in real life. So that brings us to this question: is all dream material derivative? What do I mean by that?
That means that it comes from something that you've already seen.
Right. So it's basically, yes, Putter, Uncha.
There's this thing that every face you dream of is like a face that you've seen already. There's no such thing that when you dream,
Uh-huh.
you are not seeing a face.
But what about other stuff? So what about unfacely things?
So I think it's the same thing. Like there is this theory that dreams are basically just kind of like you're revving up an engine. So it's like
Fair enough.
personal experience when you're writing the dream journal.
Uh-huh.
There was a lot of stuff, like I have really vivid dreams of both
Hmm.
things. So even जो छोटी-छोटी चीजें जो आती हैं, there'd be like really tiny details or like some really small occurrence might pass by someone or like I'd be eating something and when I would be writing that down I'd be like यार मैं like उससे एक रात पहले या मैं सुबह सोच रही थी जैसे यार मैंने ये करना है.
So the vast majority of dreams are derivative, right? Are there some dreams that are not derivative? We don't know the answer to that, right? Thank you for writing your dream journals. Zainab and I looked at them this morning. Do you want to announce the two people that I'm taking out?
Amna Riyaz
Thank you, Amna. We loved the illustrations. Is Amna here? Yes, yes. Thank you. That was very good.
and Shireen Yasser.
Thank you very much again. I really enjoyed reading that. Hand for them, please. You guys did a good job overall. And, much better than the midterm. Okay, so essentially, dreams are recollection of mental content from sleep, right? Because there is this whole memory issue that is there. Dreams are generally associated with REM sleep, right? Who is going to tell me what REM sleep is? Putter, Zoya at the back.
It's when the body is like recovering and you are like fired very spontaneously, erratically as if you're wakefulness for a sleep.
Okay. Can somebody help Zoya? Putter, what is REM sleep? We just did sleep last week. Oh, नहीं यार. Theta waves होती हैं sleep में. चलो good कि वो याद है. हाँ जी पुत्र आप बताएं. I'm telling you that already. What are REM? What does REM look like? What other state does REM sleep look like? Yeah.
There's this characteristic
Yeah, no, so it's eye, you have eye movements in sleep, but REM EEG looks like the awake state, right? It's the state, okay. So it's the state, do you see like awake and then REM sleep? If you weren't looking at the patient, you or the person, by just looking at this EEG, you can't tell what is awake and what is REM, right? Do you see the theta waves, Ibrahim? And stage 1 theta waves. So congratulations on remembering something. I congratulate you for that, but no, that is not what we were looking for. Okay, so Siglari et al. In 2017 tried to find the neural correlates of dreaming. Okay, so don't we already know this? Don't we know that the neural correlate of dreaming is REM? No, because I just told you, right, that there is dream material that comes from non-REM also, right? So this is the 2017 study that Siglari et al. Did, which is basically non-REM and REM sleep. They showed that dream experiences were associated in local decreases in low frequency activity in the posterior cortical regions. Jiputar.
See any transition between the neural correlates that someone does from an unconscious dream to lucid dreaming or something?
Lucid dreaming happens so rarely, Putar, that we really don't have a good grasp on what happens in lucid dreaming.
Masks, lucid dreaming masks that make it a lucid dreaming masks that make it a lot easier for you to lucid dream.
Yeah, there are those lucid dream goggles which just whenever they detect your eyes moving rapidly, a background red light turns on, and your dream supposedly has a reddish background, and you get to know.
We're talking about like neural correlates. We're talking about hardcore science. Which area is firing?
No. But what he's trying to say is that there are ways to induce lucid dreaming. And
so I'm not you can't prove that the lucid dreaming that happens naturally is the same as this induced lucid dreaming. Number 2, are there episodes of lucid dreaming that you do not remember? So what is lucid dreaming? Lucid dreaming is in the dream, you're aware that it's a dream and you can manipulate the events of that dream, right? Are we sure that we remember all our lucid dreamings while we are awake? We're not, right? So we don't know the neural correlates of that, okay? We actually don't know the neural correlates of regular dreaming also, because you will see this. So this person is asleep, they dream of a dog. When you wake them up with the alarm, you ask them what's on your mind, they say it's a dog, right? Then the second person is also dreaming, but when you wake them up, they were like, I was dreaming of something I cannot recall. So you can label both those events as dreams, right? Then in picture C, this person was not dreaming. And when you say, what did you see? They tell you, I didn't see anything. The third person is that person, they were dreaming of something, but I have no recall. And we have no way while people are sleeping, because we are dependent on people reporting that they were dreaming, right? So how are you going to differentiate between C and D? So basically, the bottom line is that we think that people dream in REM. We know that people dream in both REM and non-REM. And we think that in both REM and non-REM, there is a decrease in the lower frequency activity in the posterior cortical regions. And high frequency activities in these regions correlated with specific dream content. So depending on which sensory modality is the main modality in the dream that you're having, high frequency activity depends on that. But there's always a decrease in the occipital region. Jiputar.
Basically, my question was to differentiate between a person who is dreaming and a person who is not dreaming, when they both don't remember. Can you look at, so if they're seeing something, would their visual cortex?
So A, we don't know. B, we will talk about PGO in a minute, and we'll see what that means. B, how do we know when to look? Right? Because it's so dependent on reporting. If they don't remember, how do we know when to look? Because all REM is not equivalent to reportable dreams. We know that. Jiputar.
You just repeat what you said before, which I make a point about the modality.
What do you mean?
You were saying something about PC Bathgate correlated with specific dream content. Expired couldn't quite get.
Okay, so basically, there is in all REM and non-REM dreaming, there is a decrease in low frequency firing from the occipital region. That is uniform across the board. Okay, but there's also high activity, high frequency activity, and which lobe of the brain has that high frequency activity depends upon the content of the dream. So if you're having a very visual dream, your visual cortex would hopefully light up. If you're remembering like something episodic, then the region where it's an auditory memory, that region would fire up. That depends upon the dream content.
Sorry, this is a stupid question, but low frequency activity and high frequency. So like decrease in low frequency activity isn't the high frequency activity wholly alone?
देखो वो जो स्टेज 3 और 4 जो है ना वो लो फ्रीक्वेंसी है, वो कम हो जाती है, और जैसे जो REM है वो हाई फ्रीक्वेंसी है. So this is not exactly what they're talking about, but that's what happens. No worries. Okay, so I kind of gave this away. What are the neural correlates of dreaming? It's sort of like this child sitting and figuring out what water is which river. You know, so when two rivers meet, which water belongs to which river. So basically, because we cannot report on dreaming while we are dreaming, only after we are awake if we remember it. We remember the whole dream or bits and pieces of it. We remember we dreamt but cannot recall what we dreamt of, or did not think we had dreamt of anything until something happens in the day and reminds us of a dream. So therefore, we do not know the neural correlates. So even though we generally say that REM sleep is dreaming, and yes, there is some dream material that comes from non-REM, the bottom line, this is really important to understand, is that if one of you is interested in working on dreams, there's a lot of unknown stuff that's happening in dreams. So REM sleep is not equal to dreaming. Ji Putar.
Like physiological, like is there anything we can do to physiology, like sleep talking? Do people only sleep talk when they're dreaming, or do they also sleep talk?
So Putar, that is not the right question. The question, I mean, if they're sleepwalking or sleep talking, clearly they're dreaming and they're clearly in REM. But the question is, do we have dreams for which, I mean, so we know that we dream in non-REM. So where in non-REM are we dreaming? So that is the question. It's not that the ones that you can detect, you're done with, right? It's just that while we are dreaming, we are asleep, right? So if you have a dream in non-REM for which there's no outward signal, how do I, as a scientist, how do I know that you were not dreaming? When we know that you dream and you forget.
Take the template from like times we know someone is dreaming.
So you think about that yourself and tell me what the answer to that is, because I've already told you the answer for that. Because there is no one template. It's happening in both regions, right? So although REM sleep is not equivalent to dreaming, but the things that we mostly associated with dreamings, vivid emotions, vivid colors, you know, sort of the pounding heart, chasing, all of those things, the hyperassociation, you know, the sort of increase in agency, all of those things tend to happen more in REM. And when in REM, what happens is two things happen. First, there is heightened first person agency, internally generated precepts, including movement in fictive spaces, strong emotions, especially anger, elation, and anxiety, and association, even remote ones, are enhanced. Conversely, many things like critical judgment, self-reflective awareness, awareness of awareness, orientation, and memory itself all are decreased. So do you see what's happening? So in dreaming, certain functions in the brain are heightened, and certain other functions are deliberately, as an active act, they're brought down. And we'll see in a minute for what purpose. So why do we dream? Jibad.
Highway from subconscious to conscious. It's a way for our body to tell our conscious mind, hey, something's up. Let's deal with it.
वो आपको मेमो क्यों नहीं भेज देता सीधा सीधा?
And there are physiological ways that your body can tell you. Subconscious.
जी पुत्र आप बताओ.
So I think what we studied in psychology, one of the theories is that so आपकी mentation पूरी होती है, so there's mental activity happening, but your like eyes are closed and like, you're impaired. There's no like incoming stimulus happening. So your I think prefrontal cortex kind of like constructs a narrative from things that have happened like then or something to kind of make sense of the fact that activity is happening, but there's no like incoming stimulus.
Okay, you're getting at the right thing. जी पुत्र आप बताओ ऊंचा.
It is a way that our subconscious speaks to us regarding problems pertaining to the world and that we are consciously even isn't aware of. They subconsciously they are portrayed in these dreams, and for example the concept of dream analysis that you analyze what these dreams are.
So I'm going to stop you here. What percentage of people would feel कि dreams की insights देने की yield बहुत poor है? So अगर आप 100 दफ़ा ड्रीम करते हो तो उनमें से कितनी ड्रीम्स क्लियरली आपको पता चलता है कि उनका क्या मीनिंग है, राइट? सो इतनी सारी एक्टिविटीज़ में से इतनी थोड़ी यील्ड है कि फॉर अ और ड्रीम कौन कौन ड्रीम करता है एनिमल किंगडम में? व्हाट स्पीशीज ड्रीम? जी पुत्र. Mammals dream, absolutely. What other broad group of animals dream? Or at least have REM sleep? So this is really important. बाद में all warm-blooded animals. So जिन लोगों की homeothermy होती है, उनमें हमेशा REM sleep होती है, and we think कि उनका common regulator है. That is why they tend to go together. So REM sleep is actually one time during your day when humans become cold-blooded animals. Homeothermy abort हो जाती है during REM. Right? So अगर आप बहुत गर्मी हो या बहुत सर्दी में सो रहे हो तो उससे भी REM abort हो जाती है. Right? So and we don't think इसकी कोई बहुत deep dark reason है. We just think उनका common regulator है. That is why they tend to happen together. Birds में भी ये है, mammals में भी सब में ये है. Okay, so look at the infrastructure that you have. You have 86 billion neurons in the brain. Each neuron has 7,000 synaptic connections on average. So that's 600 trillion synapses. That's an average sort of midlife person. In young children, before pruning happens, you can easily have up to 1 quadrillion synapses. 10,000 trillion synapses are not uncommon in young humans in their 20s. And in every second, there's 100 trillion synapses that are firing. Some at less than 1 hertz and some at 200 hertz. So basically, Stick Gold, who is a professor at Harvard, very learned guy, who says that basically he has proposed the next step model, which is similar to what Putra, aap mujhe apna naam phir se batao? Anushya was saying, which is that, you know, it's a network exploration to understand possibilities. In other words, you see if some weak connections can join up to make a fuller whole. So आपने सारा दिन absorption जो है ना वो information absorb की थी. अब आप उसके जो tight connections हैं उनको छोड़ के जो आपने waking time में भी देख लिए थे, you're now going to see if weak connections make sense. And he says that, you know, there are the sleep has some extra tools to make this obvious. We've already talked about some of these. It shuts down the hippocampus, shutting down short-term memory. It reduces noradrenaline, which relaxes you and biases you towards weaker connections. The prefrontal cortex shut down, so basically logic जो है उस पे apply होना बंद हो जाता है. And it cranks up your limbic system to see which emotions are the dominant state in your system. Okay? So ये सारे कुछ क्यों कर रहे हैं? That seems a lot of effort to just dream. जी पुत्र. So memory is we'll see. Memory consolidation is one of the things that happens. Why are we going to this much trouble? That's a lot of, and it doesn't seem accidental कि आधी चीजें बंद कर दी, आधी चीजें heighten कर दी हैं. Why is the brain doing this? जी पुत्र. Don't we know empirically?
We know this heightened state is associated, right? Or is it the other way around?
So REM sleeping is where?
Right now you said some places are heightened, some are reduced, right?
Right.
We know that that's a state of dreaming, right?
Yeah.
When you said before that we can't.
So when this happens, we know that we are dreaming. But are we dreaming in states other than this, for which we have no outside clue? Right? That was Ibrahim's question.
Initially, it was only thought that when the activity is at the max, which is in REM sleep, that's when you dream. But now we know, we are aware that there are dreams even in non-REM sleep,
And
when
you
the
can
activity is suppressed.
And you can have REM sleep without dreaming.
And you can have REM sleep without dreaming.
So you can have REM sleep without dreaming. So basically, when if you drink alcohol non-stop, all your REM is suppressed. And then basically you go into delirium tremens, and you know, talking about temperature, has anybody ever seen somebody in delirium tremens? Okay, delirium tremens, if you drink a lot, if you become acutely intoxicated with alcohol, you have this like tremor that's going all over your body. In delirium tremens, also your temperature regulation is completely off. So sort of like building that, strengthening that relationship between dreaming and temperature. Ji Putar.
This was a symptom of like a state called dream starvation. Like you need to like have being deprived of dreams actually lead to physiological
Consequences? Absolutely, it does. You're absolutely correct. Okay, So Hobson et al. Hobson is a colleague of Stiggold at Harvard, and he, I think, just died, was a colleague, I think he just died. He did some of the seminal work in dreaming in the 90s, in the noughties, and in the teens. And he basically says that, basically, which we have been coming back to in this course again and again, that basically there is a sensory motor virtual reality that the brain generates. And it has two modes. During the day, you're taking in sensory data to basically, see, okay, is the model correct or not? And then at night, you basically shut down the outside door and you go back and you look at that new data and you say, how can I make the model more perfect? Which associations do I need to prune? And which associations do I need to strengthen? So let's suppose you lived in Glasgow and you had this whole thing about how you got from work to home. Then you say, let's say you move to Lahore now. So for the first few months, that Glasgow model is going to stay alive in your brain. And then slowly, as it loses its relevance, as sensory input changes from what the previous model was, the new model is going to start gaining strength. Right? So basically, that's how the brain is constantly, and remember in sleep we had said that probably sleep was the primary state, and then wakefulness was a second thought, which basically the organism said, okay, it would be good to see what the environment is throwing at me. So this goes in accordance with that you basically had an interoceptive map to begin with. Right? You already had this map to basically kind of fine-tune your internal functions, and then when you develop the sensors to interact with the outside world, you still need to go ahead and prune that model. Because what is the disadvantage of the model being out of date, Anusha? No, but answer my question first, though. Question is, what is the disadvantage of having an out-of-date sensory motor model in your head? Okay, but what's the what's wrong with that? So many people live 50, so many people have mental models that are 50 years old. Do they have any disadvantage in the real world?
Kind of for example, if I give an example, for example, teenagers, when they're having that spurt, the center of gravity will rapidly change, and that's why they kind of sometimes become really clumsy. Their body is not used to their new height or their new mass, right? So that's kind of, I think, the same thing.
Yeah, so that's a really good example from actually a physical example. I was going to give mental model examples, but that's a physical example. Your proprioception has this model of you, and if your height is actually changing and you don't have the ability to update that model, you're not going to be able to actually walk straight. Okay, Ibad, you had a question?
Is dreaming just rehearsal for real life?
No, it's pruning of the model of the world that you have inside. So there is some genetic inputs. You discover you inherit certain hardware, and on the basis of that hardware, you put in memory, experiences, what you're learning, and this learning is, some of this is implicit, some of it is declarative learning, and that's a whole sensory motor model. It's beta testing, or the beta testing lasts all your life. When the beta testing finishes, you die basically. Ji Putter.
Just a clarification. Last slide, you talked about how during sleep, how muscle paralysis, well, the brain is still sending muscle twitches because it's fine-tuning its motor system. So is this kind of similar?
It's similar to that. So basically, and that happens very majorly. So I didn't actually include that, but you see how REM sleep is actually, there's a lot of REM sleep in children, and then as we get older, the REM sleep tapers off. Partly we think because, remember we talk about again and again about how brain is mainly a motor simulator, right? Motor function is the hardest thing that the brain does. So बच्चे जब चलने की और सारी जो हम basic motor functions, the fact that I can just sit here like that without looking at where I'm sitting, this is a marvel of brain motor stimulation, a simulation, right? So part of the reason why we have so much REM in young children is because unka motor system train ho raha hota hai. And we think that the reason REM sort of tapers off as we get older is ke, I mean, your model is pretty good at some things, and then aapka baad mein phir brain kharab hona shuru ho jata hai. We'll talk about, when we talk about the health of the brain, how, you can keep your brain at its peak health. So basically, one of the reasons why children have so much REM is because they're training their motor simulator. So So but the dreaming में, so this is happening in REM. The pruning and the strengthening is happening mainly in REM. So dreaming, so the dream material that you're having, it's basically, so we'll talk about actual physiologically क्या चीज़ होती है, but some of them we already talked about. आप अपना sensory input बंद कर देते हो, ठीक है? आपने basically अपनी emotions, आपने अपनी emotional state को heighten कर लिया, आपने अपने muscles को paralyze कर लिया, आपने अपने logic को बंद कर दिया ताकि आप अपनी weak associations देख सको, and you are sending these system wide, उनको PGO waves कहते हैं. So pontine, geniculate and O stands for posterolateral or cortex. वो waves हैं, but the waves are not propagated from the brainstem to the thalamus to the cortex. They all arise independently. So brain wide आपकी activity होती है, जो कि basically देखती है कि which weak associations that were not apparent to you in that waking state. And we'll talk about neuromodulatory state change होती है, and I'll talk about in a minute about neuromodulatory state क्या होती है. So आप एक different state में with different constraints आप उसको एक और simulation run करके देखते हो कि इसमें कोई नई associations निकलती हैं. Can I make a bigger sense of the whole? Can the model accommodate the new data and come up with some new insights? Does that make sense? That's what dreams are doing for you. किसी और का हाथ था यहाँ पे. जी पुत्र. ऊंचा पुत्र. Unki models become very outdated. That's that child is going to have childhood milestones delay. We know that even before this data became available. We know that children who don't sleep well, their learning is very severely affected, right? And they don't reach the milestone that their peers are reaching. We didn't need this research to know that. Okay, all right. Okay, so basically, so the other thing that I want to talk about is neuromodulatory state. So neuromodulatory states आपके brain में neurotransmitters के दो groups हैं. एक है serotonin, dopamine and noradrenaline जो कि arousal को उठाते हैं. So those are associated with awaking. And then there's the aminergic neuromodulation जो कुछ चीज़ों को depress करती है और for example emotions को heighten करती है. ठीक है? So आप जब when we go from the waking to the sleep state, you're basically serotonin, noradrenaline and serotonin, dopamine and noradrenaline goes down and your aminergic neurotransmitters go up. So in simple, sorry? Mostly acetylcholine. Mostly acetylcholine. Okay? So I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Okay? So basically, in simpler words, we generate a sensory motor, the brain generates a sensory motor virtual world that receives sensory and motor input during waking hours. And then at night, then the brain paralyzes the body to prune associations that should be pruned and strengthen those that need to be strengthened. So can somebody tell me why do we not remember our dreams? There is some work that suggests that dreams are almost actively suppressed.
Maybe a few connections are thought as like they're weak and they're lost, and when the dreams are happening, after that the connections are lost and therefore we don't remember them.
Maybe it's just, dreaming is just information processing. So if, just like you said, midday we'll see some stuff and हम एकदम से remember करते हैं. So maybe it's just a mechanism so that we don't get too distracted or too overwhelmed by the
Absolutely. It's basically a way to manage memory. आपकी already सारा input आया हुआ था, अब आपने उसकी processing की है, जो उसमें से insight है, we'll talk about early morning dreaming. But basically you don't need that, and memory, remember, is a very fastidious resource in the brain. अगर आप memory में बहुत कुछ डालो, तो क्या होता है, फिर retrieval अच्छा नहीं होता, right? So because memory would get overloaded, I'm going to talk about PGO waves. So PGO waves, I just tell that stands for pontine geniculate occipital waves, but the O is a misnomer. It's actually posterolateral cortex, and pons में अलैदा होती हैं, जो है thalamus की अलैदा waves होती हैं और cortex की अलैदा waves होती हैं. So it's not one wave that spreads to the other, it's brain wide activity. And basically PGO waves जो हैं वो awake state में भी होती हैं when we are startled. But mostly we see them while we are asleep. So why is something that that is associated with a heightened awareness? Startling is very high awareness, right? So why is something that is associated with heightened arousal happening at night? Can somebody tell me that? It's written on the slide. So why is something, so PGO waves, we know from waking EEGs, happen also during the day when we are startled. So why is something that is associated with startling, which is heightened arousal happening at night while we are in deep sleep? So REM is the deepest sleep that we can get. It's the hardest sleep to arouse you from. So why is deep sleep electrically associated with this waveform that's associated with heightened arousal? Ji Putter.
Evolutionarily speaking, it's just that we be aware of that. I think evolutionarily speaking, it's just that if we're sleeping, obviously we're not really aware of our surroundings. But then if agar hamara startled response hai, hamara wo wali awareness hai.
Read it, and then tell me. The answer is right there. Exactly. So basically, dreaming is happening to prune your models because the body wants to minimize the amount of surprises or the times it is surprised, right? So basically, आप उसको PGO waves देते हो, बाकी सारा कुछ system paralyze करके to see कि वो कितना startle होता है. Can I simulate this? Can I simulate 3? Can I simulate situation 4? Given the inputs and given the previous model, right? So basically, आपकी dishabituation हो रही है startle response की, so that आप अपने awake time में कम startle हो. जी.
Does it also have anything to do with information assimilation as well? Because during states of arousal, you are much more into this.
No, it's basically depending upon what new information is available. It basically first prunes and strengthens association, then it sort of runs simulations to see if this happens in real life, what will my reaction be? And we'll look at the model, the way it does that, and you'll see how you can build that model if you're building an AI model in computer science, you can also look at that. So the brain is not a mere reflex organ, it's a synthesizer of sensation, perception and behavior. Ji Putter.
When our brain is not able to
Uncha Putter.
when our brain is not able to mitigate the surprise startle response, is that when nightmares happen?
That's one theory of nightmares. I mean, there's also night terrors that come from non-REM sleep. So fear, we have stopped talking about fear in modern life because we think fear is something to be poo-pooed at. But from an evolutionary standpoint, fear is like, it's a really, really strong motivator. So the whole science behind, I've touched upon nightmares and night terrors very, very briefly. That's one theory. Is the simulation really bad? Do you have neuronal short circuiting? So you were trying to simulate one thing and something else got simulated. Those are all scenarios in which you can have nightmares. Ji Putter.
People who have high startle responses, is it because the simulator is working well, or is it?
At night, you mean?
No,
During the day, Putter, we can't say because the PGO waves have been recorded during waking states, but it's very, very rare. Basically, people found them in sleep research, and then somebody went looking for them in day research. So they're really not something that happens during the day. But when they happen, they're always associated with the startle response. Okay? Ji Putter.
What about people whose startle response is very high at night? So like someone is really hard to wake up, but you manage to wake them up and they don't just sit.
Yeah, so that is probably, no, there's no better or worse. Remember, there's no better or worse here, Putter. This is just all optimization. Okay. Last two questions and then I'm going to move on. Ji Putter. Uncha?
जो PGO waves हैं, I'm just confused कि is it like कि we have already established कि वो startle response, or is it more of like maybe a correlation that we can later?
Okay, so what we know from awake research is that during waking hours, they are associated with the startle response, okay? And when PGO wave आप record करते हो, तो your eyes go in the opposite direction, so there's definite correlation there. The one question is that, are they a consequence of that eye movement? And actually the driver of that eye movement is something else. We don't think that is true, but that has not been proven as yet. So that's a great question. Ji Ibrahim. Uncha.
During night concept was like you suddenly wake up. Like, is there a threshold that you have to cross of arousal to actually trigger a signal that okay, wake up.
So waking up in the morning is this whole science in itself, how all your hormones and all your brain and everything else. That's why waking up naturally is much preferred to waking up with an alarm, because there's a whole sequence of events that happens. If you have a really bad dream and fear makes you wake up because it wants to abort that dream, your heart rate is going really high or you're sweating really profusely, all of which happens if you're having a really bad dream, that's something else. That basically is the brain just waking you up because it wants to get you out of that state.
That's directly opposite to putting you in paralysis and making you simulate.
But remember we had said that for example, there is one theory which says that REM is your preparation to wake up, and rats, for example, cannot go from REM directly to non-REM, they wake up. So your brain arousal is high during REM. That's already there. Your body cannot respond to that arousal because it's being actively held down. So waking up from REM, like you're deeply asleep, so there is that mental process, but your brain arousal is already high. So startling you awake during REM is not hard. Okay. Okay, so this is, we're going to spend a few minutes looking at this. So if you look at the rectangular representation on the left, you can see there's waking, there's non-REM and REM. When we look at sensation and perception during waking, the sensations are vivid, they're externally generated. Non-REM may they are dull or absent. REM may they are vivid and internally generated, right? Then you look at thought. Thought in waking hours is logical and progressive. In non-REM, it's logical and preservative. Okay, जब आप सो रहे होते हो ना और एक ही thought आपको लगता है कि 2 घंटे से एक ही thought आपके दिमाग में चल रही है, that's probably non-REM sleep. REM में it's non-logical and bizarre because आपने अपना prefrontal cortex shut down कर दिया है. You're no longer bound by the normal constraints of logic. Then movement is continuous and voluntary. Non-REM में it's episodic and involuntary. And then REM में it's commanded but inhibited. So remember, especially in children, your motor simulator is being fine-tuned. So you have to inhibit movement for that. Otherwise, जब वो inhibit नहीं होता, तो that's when sleepwalking, sleep talking happens. And you can see that from the aminergic to the cholinergic excitation, it sort of they both cross over. इसके अंदर ये देखो कि waking और REM जो है, वो एक level of arousal पे है. ठीक है? So this is arousal. This is internal versus external. And this is basically the neuromodulatory state, right? So REM और waking जो है वो एक जितना arousal है, सिर्फ एक का ये है कि उसका internally directed है और दूसरा जो है वो externally related है, और non-REM is somewhere here which is basically that उसमें medium arousal है, right? और basically उसमें दोनों जो हैं ये crossover stage वाली के अंदर होते हैं. So this is basically a good sort of like comprehensive review of like how we go from one state to the other. समझ आ गया ये सबको? कोई? So okay, so this is arousal. Okay, this is internal versus external. And this axis is basically, this is the noradrenaline and serotonin neurotransmitters. This is the aminergic neurotransmitters, right? So you can see that waking and REM are both score high on the arousal scale. One is directed externally, waking is directed externally, and REM is directed internally, right? And then non-REM is somewhere in between. Non-REM has medium arousal, right? And basically, that's where when the switchover is happening. And it's sort of outside that realm of internal versus external. It's basically just a quiet state. Okay, so this is, during waking, your perceptions are entrained by sensation. During REM sleep, perception is sequestered from sensation. Abstract concepts, concrete concepts, orientation is preserved during waking hours, orientation is lost in REM sleep. Emotions are restrained, emotions are enhanced in REM sleep. Memory is intact, memory for remote events and even for some acute events is unavailable. Behavior is adaptive, REM sleep is inactivated, physiology, brain is activated in both states. In waking, input-output gates are opened. In REM sleep, input-output gates are closed. We have aminergic versus cholinergic. And then you have homeothermy, which is intact during waking hours and then suspended in REM sleep. There's the whole free energy minimization part of this REM versus waking that we are not going to go into. So this is the famous dream that Kekulé, the chemist, had when he was trying to figure out what is the molecular structure of benzene, right? And I always say that, you know, only in a dream could he think of this model. And we are going to talk about creativity next time. And I want you to remember this, that for true creativity, for figuring out true new associations and true outside of the box thinking, really waking, and the guy who's who's made Edward Scissorhands, what's the name of the director? Tim Burton, right. So Tim Burton says that waking is a waste of your life. All the living happens in dreams and daydreams. And if you're a creative person, I think that is very true. So you can, and you know, there's nothing wrong with derivative work. If the world was only run by creative people, we would only have projects that were begun well, but then just stayed there. So there's nothing wrong with derivative work, but I think there is this great misconception that you can force your way into creativity. And I want to present to you, we'll talk about creativity much more next time, that creativity comes from either this kind of dreaming, or it again even for meditative and other states where you shut down the sensory input that is coming in, and you allow the brain to percolate what's already there to see if novel associations can be found that weren't there to begin with. Okay? So that's why this could only, there's a reason why Archimedes was in the bath, sort of thinking of something else, you know, when the Pythagoras theorem came to him. There's a reason for these things. So how would you put dreams into an AI system? Can an AI system dream? How can you equip it to optimize its model of the world by both adding and discarding data? Right? So the advantage that the brain has is that it's the only entity which is running your body, right? So it doesn't have separate data sets. Whereas all AI models, at least that we have now, who knows what ChatGPT will become, have limited data sets, right? So they don't have the advantage of all the data that is experienced by like that system coming into them. But the huge advantage that they have is pooling, right? So me, Ibrahim, Anushe, and Zoya can't actually pool our, you know, weak associations and see what else comes up with, right? The computer models have that luxury. Once they become big enough and smart enough, you know, they can, so 500 different models can pool their data and see what new insights can we come up with, okay? How would, so what the brain does is that it shuts down the effector system, the muscles, and it shuts down logic, and it basically lowers the emotional cost of running those simulations, and so it runs these simulations in a low risk environment, right? All the risky things could happen. So when you start acting out your dreams, you can fall off a roof, you can do all of these other things, right? So basically the brain shuts down the things that can get you into trouble. So it de-risks those simulations. How can an AI system de-risk the simulations it's going to run? So, you know, how can it, for example, if it's going to predict patient outcomes, you know, how can it basically run them in such a way that you don't have, you know, either catastrophization or, you know, sort of like you make it so loose that it doesn't predict anything. G.
You have to assign a lower weight, like you have to assign the right weight to that data.
So you're now introducing your biases. So because you are assigning weights to it, right? So to a certain extent, your brain does that also, right? How does your brain assign weights? It assigns weights on the basis of past experience. So you have one constraint, which is the hardwiring that you inherited via your genes. You have some cellular level constraints that you got as epigenetic modulation of the cellular proteins, and now you have your own memories. So those are assigning weights, but it's, at least the best that we think of, it's being done independently. So when you start adding weight to your system, you're introducing your biases into it, and when it's weak associations, that's a huge problem, okay? And so that goes back to garbage in, garbage out. So if your weighings are wrong, if you weigh your data wrong, then, you know, whatever you plow in, you're going to get the results that you get, or the outcomes that you get, are going to be as bad as the data that you put in, or as good as the data that you put in. Okay, उठ जाओ सारे, खड़े हो जाओ, सारे उठ खड़े हो जाओ, शाबाश, हाथ हिलाओ, ओके, आप बैठ जाओ सर, या आधे लोग खड़े नहीं हुए, चलो खड़े हो जाओ, शाबाश 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 शाबाश, टीएस, hello, okay, all right, okay, sit down there now. So because I want you to, if nothing else, I want you guys to remember this, because this is, so यहाँ पर there is the state of the world generating sensory inputs. So यहाँ पर basically आपका model है जो कि predict हुआ है based upon current sensory inputs, ठीक है? वो है आपके synapses formed by direct perception or experience of the state of the world. So ये आपका model था इस side पे, वहाँ पर आपका actual data है जो world से आ रहा है. उसके बाद there are synapses formed by the association of the state of the world with other known states. So for example अगर आप कुत्ता देख रहे हो, but previously आपको एक कुत्ते ने काटा था, तो वो आपके साथ ही association होगी कि यार इस कुत्ते के साथ तो I mean when I see a dog, I associate that with pain. So that's your association. Then there are synapses formed by the association of the state of the world with the current neuromodulatory state of the brain. So we already talked about two neuromodulatory states, which is one is wakefulness and the other is sleep. But there are other neuromodulatory states also, right? Depression, anxiety, other mental illnesses, right? So जब आप depressed हो और आपका serotonin थोड़ा है, तो ये आपका model उससे affect होएगा, right? And then there is, you also calculate what will the impact, what impact does the changing state of the world have on the organism? Like how will you feel when it is cold, or how much pain will you have when the dog bites you again? The brain is going to include, so this is called the committee of sleep. So there's all these stakeholders who basically now tell that predicted model, this is how we want to prune it. Then the brainstem controls the access to the world, because remember we talked about this when we were doing thalamus, that you know we don't see what is out there, we see what our brain tells us to see, right? And what also it does is that it makes predictions about its own activity. कि you know अगर ये कुत्ता मेरी तरफ आया तो मैंने भाग जाना है, right? The brain already knows if the dog comes towards me, I'm running away, right? Who says that? My nephew says that people do bodybuilding so that he can fight, or so that they can fight. He does cardio so he can run away. So I think that's a really good model. So this is the classic dream from Jungian analysis. A man is being offered a new job. He's very good at what he does now and is not sure how he'll do in the new position. He dreams of a train approaching a magnificent train station, and as it enters the station, it derails. What does this dream mean? Anybody? आप बोल चुके हो, पुत्र आप पिंक कपड़ों में, forgive me मुझे आपका नाम नहीं आता. What does the dream mean? ऊंचा. It's Jungian analysis, there's no wrong answer. He's already been offered the job. Scared he will fail. So his unconscious is telling him, you're very good at what you do right now, you really want this new job, you're probably not going to be very good at it. Okay? So in dream, so some of you were very good when you did your dream analysis, and this is not a psychology class or a psychoanalysis class. So I mean, we're not going to spend too much time talking about analysis, but when you remember a dream, or when you're trying to understand what a dream is about, sort of like the minute details that we tend to get fixated on are really not important. It's the big picture. Where is the dreamscape located? Switzerland, Pakistan, India, in the middle of the ocean. What does that dreamscape, what significance does that dreamscape have in your memories? Is it a wooden house because your dadi lived in a wooden house, right? What was the time of the day? How much light was there? What colors were prevalent, right? Were you alone? Were you with somebody else? You know, so sort of that big picture framing things are much more important than what actually people are doing in the dream, or you know, creatures are doing in the dream. So types of dreams, ordinary versus extraordinary dreams. So both Freud and Jung talk about extraordinary dreams and ordinary dreams. Sufi literature talks about satanic versus godly dreams, although I'm not sure the banal dreams that we have about the fact that, you know, it's raining outside and my clothes are still on the clothesline, I'm not sure that's satanic. But there are ordinary dreams, just, you know, the churning. And then there are godly dreams. And the Sufi literature says, not Jung and Freud, that those tend to come towards the morning. can somebody tell me what, based on what we have already done in today's lecture and the lecture that we and sleep, why is it that dreams that come towards the morning are likely to have more robust insights than dreams that happen in the first part of the sleep? Ji putra, uncha. Absolutely. And what else? Uncha. Okay. Absolutely. That those are two really good factors. High CP. What? There's a third factor. Ji putra.
So I think the parts of your brain that are most active and the parts that are inhibited make sense here because there are illogical parts that I think I'm not able to explain.
It's okay. Anybody else? Putar aap, brown head cover. I'm saying there's one other insight as to why the dreams that come towards the morning would have more robust insights than dreams that happen earlier in the night. So your colleague told you that it's because it's the longest REM cycle and you are close to waking up, so you remember. What is the third reason? So body temperature uniformly REM में गिरता है. So वो सारे REM में एक जगह.
Towards the morning it increases, that's what.
No, but वो REM से बाहर निकल के होता है, not REM के अंदर. REM में आपकी homeothermy is aborted. So पुत्र देखो ना, अगर आपके 4 या 5 अगर cycles होते हैं, तो आपकी successive cycles में भी तो कुछ ना कुछ आगे processing चल रही है ना, right? So it's not, we don't know this for sure, but logic says कि जो पहला cycle था, आप जब multiple iterations करते हो, तो पहली iteration is generally less refined than the last iteration, right? So those are some of the reasons why we think that, and I'm not suggesting that you should look for insights in your dreams. I mean, you're at liberty to, but here's some scientific thought as to why dreams that you have towards the morning may have more insights than dreams that you have earlier in the night. We have disorders of dreaming. So nightmares, night terrors, sleepwalking, sleep talking. We've already spent a great deal of time talking about sleepwalking and sleep talking. It's basically when your muscle paralysis doesn't work very well. You know, there are cats in which you make locus coeruleus lesions that destroy their center, that basically shuts down their muscle. And every night the poor cats fight these imaginary adversaries every REM cycle, because basically their muscles are not disinhibited. I don't think this experiment should be done on humans, so we'll have to take cat data on it. Nightmares, I mean, Ibad touched on some of the reasons why we may have nightmares. Nightmares may come from things that we fear, from just the regular sort of looking for weak associations. They may also come from short circuiting. You know, within the neurons, remember each neuron has 7,000 synapses, so not all of them ordered by any like logical thought, only by just because they co-occur. So basically on a tangent, the processing can go a route which may not be relevant to pruning the model, but will generate a nightmare. We don't know a great deal about night terrors. They tend not to have the vivid sort of pictures and sounds and feel that REM sleep has. They tend to be just basically about fear. And when people wake up from night terrors and you ask them what happened, they're generally not able to tell you what happened. They'll say this person was chasing me, but they don't see the person. It's basically, and most, I mean, there's a reason why they call night terrors. Most night terrors are about fear. I'm going to spend the last 15 minutes talking about your dream journals and basically answering any questions that we have. Ji Putar.
Just wanted to ask, so when it comes to sleep paralysis, I know the reason that you can't move is because आपका कोई वाला part where your movement is inhibited, चल रहा होता है. But then what's the process behind seeing that when your eyes are open or when you're awake?
पुत्र मुझे आपके सवाल की समझ नहीं आई. Ask me again.
मतलब जो sleep paralysis होती है, मतलब you wake up, you're paralyzed, but you're still seeing the terrifying thing in real life.
Or that you're paralyzed. So sleep paralysis is a disorder. Yeah. So for most people, as soon as REM ends, your sleep paralysis ends. And sleep paralysis is a pathological condition in which that paralysis lasts for about 10 minutes longer than the REM sleep. And if you happen to wake up in that time, it basically feels like you can't move. And it's temporary. We don't have a great deal of insight into. It's not a disease, but it's a disorder.
But sometimes you see stuff
Uh-huh.
where after you wake up, like a lot
So what are those called?
I mean, like, I'm not going to say like hallucinations or something, but we
Yeah. So there's Dr. Nasir, there's hypnagogic solutions and
Hypnopompic.
hypnopompic. So those are hypnopompic hallucinations. So your brain is not fully awake. It's trying to conjugate external and internal imaging, and in that process, it will come up with things that don't make any sense. Like once I woke up and I thought there was a lion's cub sitting at the foot end of my bed. It was a batik ka dupatta which had similar colors, but I had morphed that into, and I was convinced ke baitha hua. I was like very still. Right? So those are hypnopompic and hypnagogic. So hypnopompic hallucinations are the one that you have when you wake up. Hypnagogic are the ones that you have. So those are just transitional state imagery, mixing the two worlds. So if you understand that internal and external worlds are sort of like both present, that's what creates those bizarre images. Anybody else? Ji putter. Putter uncha.
like, I read this one post a while ago.
Mm-hmm.
That in the 20th century, people used to dream in black and white
Mm-hmm.
because television was in black and white.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, according to this, our brain has like a simulation, like
Hmm.
machine models. So then, why were they seeing things in black and white when they had like?
So I don't think that is true. I want to actually say we make movies because we've been having dreams for a very long time. I don't think people used to dream in, I mean, you can dream in monocolor, like some dreams, especially like the dark sort of scary dreams tend to have very little color. But I think we have evolved to we thought of making movies, right? Because for millennia, we were dreaming and now we had the ability to make them. So I don't think that's true, Putter. Ji Putter, Uncha?
I want to just challenge the idea of trying to integrate dreams into AI, because we talked in the very beginning that a large data set is just missing. And we're going off of what is essentially survivor bias. We're going off of what we can see, what we can associate with it.
Is that going to stop us from trying? Adrian and I just had this conversation while we were walking to class. I was like, this whole thing, this class has been so useful. So Dr. Nasir and I and Adrian are working on this software that's essentially going to, I'm a primary care physician, I'm essentially trying to build something that will make me redundant. Basically, that will basically listen to a doctor-patient conversation and give you a diagnosis and a treatment plan, right? So I'm cool with making myself redundant, but let's suppose that you said that this software became super aware and it decided that humanity was a pox on the Earth's face, which you can make a case that humanity is destroying the planet. And could it decide? Adrian was of the opinion that this trope of that a super smart intelligence would always kill us. That is the justification it would use. My question, I agree with you that I think that our brains are imperfect and they are far, far superior to any artificial intelligence models that we have as yet. And there is no guarantee that the artificial intelligence models we will make will not suffer from all those biases that you are saying. Is that going to stop us from trying? It's not, right? Ji Putter. Uncha. So this is the last time I'm allowing this. If you ask me something, I want a reference because go ahead.
So like people dreaming of colors that didn't exist, and then when you ask what were the colors, they can't describe them because they don't.
So apply everything that you know about. You did the lectures on vision, right? You know that birds can see colors that you can't because they have an extra. What do birds have that we don't have? They have an extra cone, right? That they have an extra cone that can see wavelengths that we can't see. So they see more colors that we can, right? Can I imagine those colors? No, right? Sapne ki bhi had thi aakhir, had se bahar jata kaise? So those people who are dreaming that they're seeing colors that they've not seen in life, right? They just think, how in dreams, so somebody wrote about you wrote about that, right? The bicycle that they had lost and they couldn't remember the bicycle. Okay, so this, forgive me, I'm going to use this now. So basically Ibrahim lost his bicycle and when he went to report the theft, he couldn't describe the bicycle to the police to say, an accurate description. Then he sees the same bicycle in his dream and he remembers it perfectly. Now, do you think he actually really remembered the bicycle perfectly, or was it just how, dream makes you believe certain things about it? That, this is how it is, like you're in a house that is not your dadi's house, but the dream tells you this is your dadi's house. So basically those people, that's that suspension of reality. The dream tells them you're seeing colors that you've not seen in real life. Physiologically, you know that a color that you have not perceived, you cannot think of it, right?
There is this weird thing in the brain that it associates a lot of different circuits and gives a lot of meaning to things to things which would not have that meaning if they're not associated. And disorders of that association lead to very interesting phenomena, like you've heard of deja vu, you've heard of extreme unfamiliarity feeling, the Jamis vu. You've heard we've talked about Oliver Sacks at one time. He talks about such patients. Dreams and familiarity with the new color that you're seeing, or unfamiliarity, is just invoking that circuit of unfamiliarity. It's not that they've actually seen something unfamiliar. It's seeing something which they can perceive, but getting a feeling of unfamiliarity from it. Do you get what I'm saying? So it's not that they're seeing something which they would not see otherwise, because you can't imagine something which you cannot see or perceive, but you see that and still be able to perceive it as something different. That's what happens in the dream. Am I making sense? Okay, thank you.
So somebody was asking me here, so people, kids who don't sleep and who don't dream, does it really affect their, development and their learning? Here is direct data. So in 2010, I believe, researchers presented people with a 3D maze and then basically encouraged all of them to nap. And then after they woke up from the nap, they asked people, did you dream or did you not dream? So again, here is that bias again, that maybe some of them had dreamed but just didn't remember it. But at least the data went by. A nap is short, so people generally do tend to remember their dreaming. So look at the difference. It's 10x, not 10% or 25% or 50%. It's 10x. So all of you who think that staying up that extra hour or extra 3 or 4 or 5 hours and not giving yourself enough time to sleep and or using substances that damage the architecture of sleep. And if you, we didn't talk about this, but if you damage the architecture of your sleep, so by now that sleep is really complicated, right? There's stage 1, stage 2, there's stage 3, stage 4, and there is REM sleep, and then there is cycling. And how long do you stay in each cycle, and then how do the successive cycles stack up? So there's this all complicated architecture of sleep. And there is data that's similar to how when you mess up your focus. Remember when we were talking about attention, we had talked about research that really humans are not capable of multitasking, but then when we do multitask, we basically fracture our attention. And all the data that we have is that especially for young people, if they fracture their attention when they're young, rebuilding attention to be able to focus deeply on something we are not sure that process is reversible. So similarly, there's data that if by a prolonged period of some manipulation. So Adrian was telling me this story yesterday where he, without thinking about it, had chocolate covered espressos, like half a bag, and then for 2 weeks afterwards your sleep was fractured, right? So not 1 night or 2 nights or 3 nights, but 2 weeks after. I mean, that was a lot of espresso, I think. But if you mess up the architecture of your sleep, it's not easy to correct it. And we know that just from the fact that, let's suppose you always go to bed at 10, but like for a few days or a few weeks, you go to bed at 2 or 3 a.m. and when you try to go to bed at 10, it's really, really hard to go to bed at 10, right? Even when you're tired, it's really hard to make yourself. So from just that minor adjustment, you can know. So imagine that either from caffeine or alcohol or maybe amphetamine pills or some other substance, you've actually messed up the way sleep transitions from one stage to another. I don't even know how you would fix that. So for an exam or for something, I mean, if somebody is dying, for example, if your friend calls you and say, I'm going to kill myself and you actually believe them, then, or like if somebody's hurt and you want to go help them, for something like that, of course, you sacrifice sleep. But for an exam, and then look at like the things that happen. If you know that you're not going to compromise your sleep and you still care about your grades, that automatically brings discipline, right? You're going to study ahead while you're awake, during daytime, or during the early part of the night. This is we've already touched upon this, is that we dream to forget. So there's so much data coming in that if we don't prune the data that is important, that is unimportant, we basically would just grind to a halt. Who here has had somebody tell them that was really significant to the other person, but you have like zero memory of them? Yeah, everybody, right? Everybody. Those of you who are not raising their hands, you just don't remember the actual, because the person is not confronted with you. After I came back to Pakistan, I met this woman who was a few years younger than me, and she came and she hugged me really tight, and I was like, yes, she thinks I'm somebody else. And then she's like, oh, I stayed in your apartment for 3 weeks while I was interviewing. And she described my apartment. I tried to remember her. I have zero memory of her. Like my brain has wiped. I mean, 3 weeks is not like 2 hours or 3 hours, and she was living in my house. But clearly she had, as time went by, that association was not being reinforced, so it's completely dead. Right? So it's like the memory of so like there are some memories which you can't recall on demand, but then something happens and you can recall it, right? So I say that even the memory of the memory is lost, right? You don't have that memory at all. Then I think somebody also mentioned it here, things that we are, so this is in some ways maybe the main function of dreaming, is that things that are high risk in the real world, you simulate them in a low risk environment to see how you would feel. Right? So I think I told you guys, right, that all physicians in Pakistan have had a patient who died of a snake bite, and later the snake was caught and the snake was not poisonous. Huh? Was not poisonous or venomous.
Poison is if you eat the snake, you die. Venomous is the snake bites you.
No, I mean people eat snake, yeah. Non-venomous snakes are eaten all the time.
Then you're poisoned. It's venomous. And snake
Okay. So the snake did not have venom or did not have poison, right? So basically, if you are so afraid of something, your brain simulates it, then that is going to have a real effect on the choices that you make during waking hours. And then we dream to heal. We've already also checked about that how even though dreaming is really vivid and we are running all this high risk simulation, your noradrenaline system is shut down. So even though if you're really, really afraid, you will sweat and your heart will speed up, but the response is much less than it is during waking hours. Right? So basically in this low risk setting, especially, I think this is partly what PTSD is, that your brain runs the simulation again to try and see if it can defang it for you, and sometimes it actually just keeps it so fresh that you actually can't function during your waking hours. So we think that PTSD is not a malfunction, but like one of the unintended consequences of why we dream. Puttaji.
Also, like in depression, one of the indicators of somebody recovering from depression is they start dreaming about kind of doing activities that they stopped doing while they were depressed, or kind of dreaming that they've gone for a walk or that they're with their friends, and that's kind of an indicator that they've started to recover from depression. So that kind of adds.
That's again an indication of that, a proof, an evidence towards that rehearsal theory, that the brain is trying to rehearse before the individual can get back to the normal function.
So, but also, because remember, one of the drivers of dreaming is your neuromodulatory state, right? So if your serotonin is really low and the pessimistic part of your brain has a real evolutionary function, right? If you do not think of like all the bad consequences of all the things that are happening, you're going to end up doing really high risk things. That's what mania is, right? In mania, fear is gone. So you go and you basically sell all your furniture for $10 and try to sell your best friend and all these other like things that have like no logical sense. when you give serotonin reuptake inhibitors, like things like medications that treat depression, your REM is suppressed. And your therapeutic effect is actually correlated with that REM suppression. Okay? And when you go off of SRIs, there's a REM rebound. So whenever a physician takes somebody off of an SRI, you have to tell the patient that for the next 6 weeks, you will have more vivid dreams. They generally tend not to be nightmares, they're just more vivid dreams, and then they taper off. So Putra, I'm not sure that depression से recovery में REM rebound होता है या नहीं होता, but SRIs की weaning में definitely होता है. Okay? All right, guys, I think we're out of time. Thank you so much.